I know it's been a while, but we are now continuing the Girl Scouts canoe trip. Chapter 9. Back to Civilization. More than a week had gone by since the girls had left their homes. By this time, they were quite accustomed to the peaceful routine of the trip. Indeed, it seemed to Marjorie as if they had gone much longer. During all this time, they had not visited a town. They slept under a roof only one night, but they did not mind the separation from civilization for a temporary period. It entailed no hardship to these nature-loving girls. Perhaps their greatest regret was that it was not possible for them to receive any mail. By Wednesday afternoon, however, Miss Phillips expected to reach Rikers. There it was possible for some of the girls to find letters awaiting them at the post office. "Now we'll find out who are the really popular girls," said Ruth, when they were near enough to the town to distinguish a church spire in the distance. She was confident that she would find at least 2 letters, one from her mother and one from Harold, so she knew that she was safe in making this remark. "I won't get any," observed Marjorie. "I forgot to tell Mother we're expected to stop here." "How about you, Doris?" "I don't know," replied the girl carelessly. "But I do know that we've got some water in our canoe. Do you see that, Marge?" Marjorie turned sharply around. She had been resting up in the bow and looked at the bottom of the canoe. Doris was right. There was about an inch of water. "Water?" echoed Ruth, who had overheard the remark. "Don't you know it's a signal of a very poor boatsman to splash water into the boat?" "Maybe it is," admitted Marjorie. "Nevertheless, it's there, and I do believe it's getting deeper. Look." Miss Phillips paddled close at these words and peered anxiously into the will-o'-the-wisp. "It's a leak," she declared. "Evidently you have grazed a jagged rock or a tree stump." "Can it be fixed?" asked Doris, hastily making for the shore. "Oh, yes, quite easily," replied the captain. "But since we are so near to Rikers, we might as well have it repaired there, for a real repairman would have more tools than we carry." Marjorie and Doris directed the will-o'-the-wisp to the shore and got out while the others went a short distance farther down towards the regular place. Miss Phillips opened a box and took out 5 padlocks with chains. "We will put these in here," she added. "If I only had used the precaution to do this on the island, we wouldn't have had all that needless worry and loss of time. But it was exciting, you know," argued Ruth. "Besides, I can't see why you are in such an awful hurry, Captain." "Yes, I know it is. Nevertheless, it is too good an opportunity for pleasure for us to miss a day at Silverton. I should think you would be one of the first to realize that, Ruth." Ruth said nothing. She did realize what a wonderful thing it would be to spend 10 days at Silverton, and yet she wanted to delay the canoe trip, for she knew to her dismay that she was not making the progress she had hoped for. At a little trial race, which they had arranged the preceding day, Marjorie had come in far ahead. Ruth was next, and Frida close behind her. But none of the other girls gave her any cause for worry. She knew that she had endurance, and her ability to rescue a capsized canoe was really commendable. She even felt that, putting forth a mighty effort, she might possibly be able to beat Marjorie, but it was very doubtful, and she knew that a mere presence of a leak in her canoe would not keep her opponent out of the race, for Marjorie would handle one canoe as well as another. At last, therefore, she made her decision. As a final resort, she would summon Harold Mason to her assistance. She would put the plan they had conceived together to a test. As soon as Miss Phillips had locked the boats and the girls had packed up the supplies, which they did not care to leave in them, they all started for the town. It proved to be a surprisingly short walk. Within a few minutes they had reached the main street, and were gazing into the windows of the shops as if they had not seen a store for months. "I think we shall put up at a little inn called the Green Tree," said Miss Phillips. I have heard it is very nice, and the rest will do you girls good, particularly Frida," she added. "She needs a rest from cooking." "But let's go to the post office first," pleaded Ruth. "I could never rest until I find out whether there is any mail." "Well, then, Ruth, suppose you and Lily go for the mail. You will have to inquire where the post office is, while the rest of us go to the inn. Do you see that green and white house at the next street on the corner? Well, that's it." "We won't get lost," said Ruth, joyfully seizing Lily's hand. "See you again in 5 minutes," she added. As the weary girls approached the inn, they found its aspect most inviting. Evidently, the structure itself was very old. The low, rambling white building reminded them of the Revolutionary period. A wide lawn extended in front of the house, and to the left of the walk was an immense shade tree. "It isn't hard to know where the inn gets its name, is it?" said Miss Phillips, nodding to the direction of the big maple. "And it is a beautiful tree." "If the inn proves to be as nice as the outside," said Ethel, attempting a pun, "I'll be satisfied." The interior disclosed a central hall, and with a reception room on either side. One of these was attractively furnished as a parlor, and the other was obviously the office. Into the door of the latter Miss Phillips therefore entered. "5 nice rooms on the second floor," announced the clerk, in answer to Miss Phillips' request. "I think you ought to like 'em, too." "Is this house very old?" asked Marjorie, as they ascended the broad, curved staircase. "Yes, very. George Washington stayed here one night on his way to Philadelphia." "Of course he did," laughed Doris. "But say, is it haunted?" "I reckon," answered the man. A moment later he flung open 2 or 3 doors and disclosed the bedrooms. There the girls beheld 4 poster beds, colonial rag rugs, and snowy curtains at the windows. "It's lovely," exclaimed Miss Phillips. "We certainly ought to have a real rest. Now," she waited for the clerk to depart, "has anybody any preference as to rooms? Select whichever you like." "All right," agreed Frances. "But let's all stay together for a minute till Ruth and Lily come back with the mail." "A real bed!" exclaimed Marjorie, removing her shoes and throwing herself upon it. "It does seem like luxury now, doesn't it?" she remarked. "And such a lot of space to dress in," added Doris. "And hot water for a bath," put in Ethel. The girls were indeed tremendously elated over the prospect of hot baths, leisurely dressing, and a dinner which they did not need prepare or clear away. For 15 minutes they lay on the beds, chatting happily and resting. So absorbed were they in their conversation that they did not notice their captain's absence until she returned. "I have phoned about your canoe, Marjorie," she said, upon entering. "A very nice-sounding voice told me that it could be fixed by tomorrow morning. I sent the key up by the servant." Marjorie jumped up guiltily at the words of her officer. "Oh, Miss Phillips, I'm sorry," she apologized. "I ought to have done it myself, but—" "Never mind," laughed the captain. "It wasn't really any trouble, and I'm glad it's arranged. Now all you have to do is enjoy yourselves." Their conversation was interrupted by the appearance of Ruth and Lily. Their hands were filled with letters, and their eyes sparkled with pleasure. "Did I get any?" cried Alice, jumping up at their entrance and rushing towards them. "Everybody got some," answered Ruth, "even Marge, who pretended nobody knew her address." "I can't imagine who," she began, as Lily tossed the letter into her hands. Then, upon recognizing John Harley's handwriting, she became silent. But how he had found out the address was a mystery to her, and she was too shy to ask questions and run the risk of being teased. "You got lots of mail, didn't you, Miss Phillips?" observed Ruth. The captain looked up, smiling. "Yes, I received a lovely letter from the people who are responsible for this trip," she replied. "People?" echoed Lily. "I thought it was a man." "It is, but he happens to have a wife. It is she who wrote to me." Curses, cried Ruth melodramatically. And here I've been setting my cap for a rich friend, thinking all the time that he surely was a bachelor. Well, I'm afraid you'll get left then, laughed Miss Phillips, for he has a daughter about your age. A daughter? Repeated Marjorie. Do we know her? Yes, I believe you have all met her. Is she a Girl Scout? I believe she is. Lily and Marjorie both grew tremendously excited. A member of the Pansy Troop? Asked the latter. That would be telling. This last was uttered mysteriously, and the girls knew from their captain's manner that she would give them no further information. When the scouts appeared in the dining room, all in uniform, they created quite a sensation among the other guests at the inn. The people looked so pleasantly as they passed, and the women even came over to the captain to request a demonstration of scouting at the local church, an invitation which Miss Phillips was forced to decline on account of lack of time. All this while Ruth was scheming how to get away from the others to send her telegram to Harold. She regretted now that she had not seized the opportunity when she was with Lily. It would have been easier than after supper with all the others around. The girls sat on the porch until nearly dusk, when Miss Phillips suggested that they go to the movies. At least, if they have a theater, added the captain. Alice, will you run and ask the clerk? In a moment the girls returned with an affirmative answer, and the whole crowd started off in the direction indicated by the clerk. The absence of the trolley cars, the lack of congested traffic of any kind, made the town seem almost as quiet to the girls as the woods, where they usually spent their evenings. After walking along for some minutes in silence, Lily Andrews first spoke. She stopped suddenly, right in the middle of the block, overcome by serious thought. "Captain Phillips," she exclaimed abruptly, "how can we ever stay at Silverton for 10 days with nothing but our uniforms, a clean muddy, and a change of underclothing?" She uttered the last word so loudly that Miss Phillips had to caution her that it might prove embarrassing if a passer-by should hear her. "I wondered that no one asked the question before," she replied. "But I will put your mind at rest. Each girl will find a suitcase filled with their prettiest dresses and dainties already there. I arranged with your mothers to pack them." "How wonderful!" cried Marjorie, seizing her captain's arm enthusiastically. "You always think of everything, don't you, Miss Phillips?" Inside the small picture palace, they found that they could hardly refrain from laughing and talking, but they made a great effort to be quiet until they were out on the street again. "How about ice cream?" suggested Lily. "I'll treat the crowd." "Fine," agreed the girls. Ruth, however, excused herself. "I want to stop over at the post office and send Mother a telegram," she said, "just to let her know I'm all right." "But wouldn't a picture postcard be better?" asked Marjorie. "We can get them in the drugstore, and a telegram might scare her." "No, she expects a telegram," replied Ruth firmly. The girl was truthful in one respect. She did send a telegram. However, it was not addressed to her mother, but to Harold Mason, and it contained only the word "now," and was signed R.H. "And now," she chuckled, as she traced her way back to the inn, "and now the real excitement begins." Chapter 10. The Ford to the Rescue. Ruth and Harold had played tennis together almost every day, had sometimes gone for walks, and had taken a spin almost every evening after supper, since he had returned from Princeton in June. It was therefore with a thrill of joy that he received the telegram and opened it to read the brief message. His eyes lit up instantly, then glanced at his father, who was awaiting the news. He stuffed the yellow paper into his pocket. "A peach of an invitation from Miles Carter," he exclaimed. "A stag house party. By Jupiter, I am glad I'm not working and have to miss it." The explanation was, of course, made up on the spot. Even the name was fictitious. Harold had just finished reading a book in which a character, and it was the first name that popped into his head. "When does it begin?" asked Mrs. Mason, who had just entered the room in time to hear the story. "Tomorrow, in time for dinner," Miles said. Last May that this might come off if he could get a certain bungalow. But he said he wouldn't know ahead of time, so he'd have to wire. The boy smiled in satisfaction at his ingenious explanation. He was trying to decide where to locate the party when the very question was put by his father. "Where is it to be?" "Atlantic City," he replied, without the slightest hesitation. "Can I help you pack?" suggested his mother. "No, thanks," said Harold hastily, rather alarmed at the idea. His plan necessitated a complete disguise, and he had no desire for his mother to catch a glimpse of it. "Going in the car?" asked his father. "Sure, Mike." Once his room had bolted the door and unlocked a big wooden chest which was beneath his bed, then he drew out a bedazzled gray wig with a beard and a mustache to match a complete make-up outfit. A must shirt, a celluloid collar, a red necktie, a suit with baggy trousers, and a pair of old men's shoes. "Oh, I forgot a hat," he muttered. "Wouldn't my spick-and-span Panama look ridiculous with this rig?" He sat down on the edge of the bed to think. At last he decided upon his own gray felt, which he thought he could twist so out of shape as to make it look appropriate. Next he unpacked these things and locking all his dress and sport clothes in the wooden chest in the effort to deceive his mother into thinking he had taken them, he began to count his money. Fortunately, Harold Mason had his own bank account, or he could not guess just how much money he might need, and it would have been embarrassing indeed to have to ask his father for some, and have to make up other fictitious explanations. He made all his preparations, for he intended to start early Thursday morning, and by 6 o'clock he was on his way, his disguise in the suitcase in the back of the machine, and his copy of the map in his pocket. The road was good, and he knew the country well. There were no cause for delay. The distance covered by the canoes slowly following the winding course of the stream was made with great rapidity in the car. By noon he had reached the town from which Ruth had sent the telegram. Although Harold's mother had packed him some sandwiches, the boy was almost starved, and he made immediately for the only hotel in the town, the Little Green Tree Inn. He had already entered the door when a servant approached him. "Mr. Harold Mason?" he inquired. Harold stopped amazed. How could anyone here know his name? "Yes," he replied. "One of the young ladies left a letter here for you," the boy said, producing an envelope from his pocket. While Harold ate his dinner, he read Ruth's letter, which went into the minutest detail. It was a friendly letter, telling just where they expected to camp that night, which was in reality by the old mill just opposite the farm, where, according to old Michael's rumor, the weak-minded woman lived by herself. After Harold had paid his bill and sat, he counted the money in his pocket. Beside his bills and usual currency, he had been careful to bring along 2 gold pieces, for he knew that gold, above all other kinds of money, would prove attractive to people. Consulting his map and comparing it with the details in Ruth's letter, he saw he had only about 7 miles to go. He was therefore in no hurry. There would be no action until the following morning. Indeed, he finally decided to spend the afternoon at Riker's and to get his supper there, and not start for the farmhouse until after 7 o'clock. He would proceed leisurely until within 5 miles of the farm, and then stop, pull down the curtains of the car, put up his mirrors, and don his disguise. Then he would go on to the farm. It was nearly 9 o'clock when an old man with shaggy gray hair and beard and a dingy suit covered by an old dust coat arrived at the farm in his machine. He found the woman alone, just as Michael had said, but she did not appear feeble-minded. Thought ignorant and uneducated, she seemed to possess all her faculties. She was large and stout, and looked quite capable of taking care of a small farm with her own hands, and as far as he could tell in the dark, the place seemed well kept. Harold got out of his machine slowly, as he thought a man of his years should walk, and lifted his hat. The woman was seated on the porch, rocking and resting. "Excuse me, ma'am," he drawled in a disguised voice, "but have ye happened to see a bunch of gals about ye any place?" The woman looked him all over before replying. Deciding that he was evidently from the country, one of her own kind, she answered, "Yes, sir. They's a bunch of them across the stream yonder campin' out in tents. They come before sundown this evenin'." "Sho, have any of them been over here yet?" "No, I ain't seen them close." "Well, listen," said Harold, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Here's a piece of news. One of them gals has run away from her pap, and he's a rich man, as has offered a good reward to them as catches her. The gal's name is Marjorie Wilkinson. If ye and me could catch her, see," he jingled his money in his pockets, "we'd be 50-50, huh?" The woman regarded him for a moment distrustfully. "I don't know about that," she said doubtfully. "How can I believe you?" Harold took a $5 gold piece out of his pocket and held it alluringly across to her, so that she might see in spite of the darkness. "This is yours, and more later," he said, "if you promise to help me all you can. I don't mean to harm the gal in any way. I just want to keep her a prisoner here till we get word to her pap. Then maybe 500 apiece for ye and for me." The woman could not resist such a tempting offer. Her eyes sparkled in the darkness, and she seized the gold piece with greedy hands. "Sure you ain't doing no kind of kidnapping?" "Give you my word of it," he replied solemnly. "But remember, whatever I say you must pretend to her is true. For instance, you and me pretend we are married, and I'm your old man. Maybe I can sleep up in the loft of your barn." "I reckon," answered the woman. "Want stumpin' to eat?" "No, thanks. I had me supper." "How about a nice ripe peach? My peaches is supposed to be the best in this here township." "Don't care if I do," replied Harold, and he followed her into the kitchen. They sat for a while talking, Harold leading his accomplice to tell him about the farm and the surrounding country. After about half an hour's chat, they came back to the subject in question. "And how do you expect to get the girl over here?" asked the woman. "Go across and steal her?" Harold laughed unguardedly, showing his regular white teeth, which would have been almost a miracle for one of his assumed age. However, the oil lamp gave a dim light, and the woman was unobserving. The incident passed without any notice, but the boy realized that he must take more precautions in the presence of the young people. "I expect her to come over here," he replied, "probably for milk or butter or something, and if she does, you invite her into the kitchen, and I'll bolt the doors. Get an upstairs room ready, and of course I'll continue to occupy the barn as long as the gal stays, and there will be no danger to her, you can assure yourself of that. All I want is the money, and remember, we get it, it's half yours." Not long afterwards, he pumped himself a bucket of water, put his car into an unoccupied part of the barn, and crept up to his straw to bed. Though the floor was hard, Harold slept well. He was having a great adventure, and best of all, he was going to make it possible for Ruth to win her heart's desire.